Hi, I'm KayAnn Miller, and I'm a co-executive director of the Montana Partnership to End Childhood Hunger. And we work in the state of Montana to make sure that kids and their families are getting nutritious meals and that they are able to eat fresh quality food 3 times a day. And my background is in both agriculture and indigenous foods and agriculture. And uh, on top of that, I went to culinary school. And so, one of the things that I've thought a lot about as we do this work is the nutritional quality of the foods that people have available to put in their body and the foods that we're putting in our bodies. And if we think of food just a little bit differently for a moment, food is chemicals. So when we eat, we are putting chemicals in our bodies. And it matters what kinds of chemicals we're putting into our bodies if we want to be healthy, if we want to reduce or mitigate chronic disease, if we want to address diabetes, heart disease, obesity. All of those are food related diseases. So if we think about how food tastes, and we think about it as a chemical or comprised of chemicals, it's really what we're talking about is the difference between a lemon, if you think about eating a lemon, and eating a peach. The difference in texture and quality and sourness is all due to the chemical components in that food. And when we think about that from a culinary aspect, we tend to put those chemicals or those flavors or flavonoids into 5 or 6 categories. So in culinary school, we learn to think about bitter, salty, sour, sweet, and this category called umami, which is meaty, mushroomy kind of flavor. And now scientists also think that we should have 6 categories, and the sixth category being fat.
Hmm.
And those categories are based on how things taste to us. So basically, the chemicals in food are slotted into each of these categories. And on our tongue, our taste buds are dedicated to those 6 various categories. So if we eat a lot of fatty foods, the neurons that run from our taste bud into our brain, they really get a lot of development. It's like muscles. The more we work a muscle, the stronger and bigger it gets. The same with these neurons and neural networks that run from our tongue into our brain. The more we exercise a particular category of flavors, the bigger and stronger those neural networks get. Now, the problem with that is that if we want to have good nutrition, we need to be consuming chemicals from all the categories, flavonoids from all the categories. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and fat, and in particular, good fats. Uh, so cuisines that are not European dominated tend to be traditional cuisines around the world. So, like cuisines of South America before the Spanish and Maximilian get going, right? Or cuisines from Southeast Asia before France is controlling this area. Those cuisines and traditional cuisines on this continent instead of going down a column of a chemical, tend to go across the categories. And so in a dish, even in a dessert, you're probably going to get sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and some fat. That is so much healthier than when you're eating down a column. It's so much healthier to eat across. And when we think about the American diet, we don't when we do classes on this, most people don't eat a lot of sour stuff. They can't think of something sour sometimes even. And even fewer people eat bitter things. Unfortunately, like a lemon is sour because it's loaded with ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. Plants are bitter because they're loaded with things that help lower our blood sugar, help reduce our cholesterol, help us feel more satiated. And so when we're eating across categories, we're eating much more healthy. And when we eat local, we are eating even healthier. And the reason for that is we're reducing time, we're reducing the chemicals that are added to preserve foods and make them more shelf stable, make them last longer. When we eat local and we are dedicated to eating across flavors, across chemical categories, then we are getting the bitter, we are getting some sour. Think spinach, think kale. If you're foraging, think lamb's quarter, a bitter a bitter plant, right? And think choke cherries or lemons, super sour. And when we're local, the food doesn't have to go as far. So we're not adding chemicals to make it more shelf stable. We're not picking it quite so early to make sure that it gets wherever it's going in good shape. Um, we don't have to process it nearly as much. This gives us the opportunity to eat closer to a whole food. We're consuming more nutrients that are in good shape.
I think I heard you once share that there's a connection between the flavonoids interacting with the taste buds and the communication. If they're all being
Yes.
connected, it's the communication to the brain.
Yeah. So what happens is I eat something, there's communication up to my brain, and now I have multiple chemicals going in my body. First of all, the chemicals that I'm consuming, but the consuming and processing of those foods in my body is also triggering my brain to release, or potentially triggering my brain to release other chemicals. So one of the things that I did just recently is I was talking to high schoolers in a class that I was teaching, and we had split them into groups of kids who are eating mostly what we sometimes call gas station food, but highly processed foods, and kids that are eating some highly processed foods and some more whole foods or eating some more veggies, that kind of thing, and kids who are eating scratch cooking. But all three of these groups were asked to, they each had a plate of foods that filled one of the categories. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. And they were asked to taste the items on their plate and put them in the correct category. Is it sweet? Is it salty? Is it sour? And it was super interesting because the kids that mostly eat highly processed foods had, when they got to sour and bitter, they had one of two experiences at the ends of that flavor spectrum. Either they couldn't taste it at all because that neural network had not been strengthened over time and was not used to functioning, and the body's going, what is this flavor? Right? What is this chemical? What do I do with it? Or I'm thinking of one kid in particular. He ate some sumac, which is very sour, lemon sour, and his reaction was completely over the top. His he was like, it was just inflamed, like, oh, it's so sour. I've never eaten anything this sour. I can't blah. And he's like leaving the room and washing his mouth out and doing all the things. Back to the idea that it's just your neural networks are like muscles, and the more you exercise them, the stronger they are. If we're exercising the neural networks that are susceptible to highly processed food, for example, so sweet and salty, and crunch is often a partial component of that. And we eat a lot of that stuff. Those networks get bigger over time. And the body is releasing chemicals based on what we're eating. And pretty soon, when we run out of those chemicals in our body says, oh, bad thing, I need a hit. And you want more potato chips or more sugar or more highly processed bread dough, for example. And it's partly because of the development of your neural network, partly because of the chemicals that are being released. So, if we want to be healthier and to move away from that drive, we need to expose ourselves to sour, bitter, and work on building those neural networks and strengthening those neural muscles, if you will, to the same degree that we're strengthening the other ones.
A relationship, if we're eating across all five or six um, flavonoids, if you will, in a meal, is there a communication to the brain about now we've hit everything? Where is there a relationship between that and feelings, telling the body that we're
It really affects your satiation and your feeling of, oh, I'm done. I feel good. Because to your point, you just ate what you needed, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you were nourished.
So my takeaway from what you're saying is if I can include ingredients across the profiles in a meal, I'm not only getting all the ingredients that my body needs, but I'm also supporting my brain in being able to modulate when I've had enough.
Yes. And one of the things you're doing when you eat across the categories is um, you're you're less likely to cause yourself to have a blood sugar spike, so you don't get the tired drop off. You're more likely to get more of the things you need, so you have a turn off of, okay, I'm good. I got what I need. I'm good. Um, and we don't eat that way currently. In
Yep.
particular, you're looking for recipes from any tradition or style where you can look down the recipe list and think to yourself, do I have these flavors in here? So I
Right.
had this amazing dessert as an example. So it's cooked wild rice, but it's cooked to the point that it's like pudding, like like think vanilla pudding texture kind of thing, right? And So in that, I still got my umami. I've got some very complex carbs. And now on top of it, I've put some nuts. So I've got some good fat. I've got some extra protein coming, and I put berries on it. So I've got some sour. And, maybe I'm taking something like, well, in this case, it was sunflower microgreens are on the top, right? Very pretty. Well, those are kind of checking my bitter component, but it's a dessert, right? It's all in one
Nice.
thing. And that's a really different style than we think about for a dessert in America. Compared to the cherry pie, that's a very different dish.
Yeah, that's really great. It's a great example. Wow. Well, thank you very much. That was I loved the story and I loved uh the variation between eating across the profiles versus just down one column.